Hi, I'm Mike Franzone, and this is Restoration Grace. You can see me here on the Mike Franzone Ministries here on YouTube, and we love to have you like it and subscribe as well. Today we're in Psalm 139. Psalm 139, a message I've entitled Fearfully and Wonderfully Made, the Case Against Abortion. I want to begin reading in Psalm 139, and actually I want to begin reading verse 1. We'll kind of pull over and park at verse 13 through 16 to get kind of the bulk of the message today, but I got to read verse 1 and following because it kind of sets us up for verse 13. Lord, you've searched me and known me. You know my sitting down, my rising up. You understand my thoughts afar off. You comprehend my path and my lying down. You're acquainted with all my ways. For there is not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You've hedged me in behind and before. You've laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is so high, I cannot attain it. Now listen to verse 7. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uppermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall uphold me. Now I'm skipping down to verse 13. Here's the text. For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Your eyes saw my substance being yet unformed, and in your book they all were written, the days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them. Life is a gift. Life is a gift from God. Life is a miracle. Life is a wonder. You know, we talked about all Black lives matter. Remember that big controversy? Well, the truth is that all lives matter to God. And we find out that the more real science discovers, the more wonderful and awesome is the gift of life. Creation reveals God. Our bodies reveal God. Conception reveals God. Our birth reveals God. Now, you recall, it was just a year, maybe 2 years ago, they had these videos where Planned Parenthood was selling dead baby parts to these wholesale groups, and now they're beginning to actually go after them in court. But how horrible it was! Who were placing the orders, and there were baby parts that were more valuable than other baby parts as well. Well, we understand in how that modern science has now debunked the theory that a baby is simply a blob of tissue in the womb. We know now that a baby is a baby. It's not a fetus in the mother's womb, and it's not a blob of tissue in the mother's womb. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. Now, Planned Parenthood has a horrible history, and I want to give you just kind of a brief overview of the history of Planned Parenthood before we get into the text. The first center for Planned Parenthood was opened up on October 16, 1916. Brooklyn, New York. Margaret Sanger, and her sister and another woman all conspired together and opened up what they called the Planned Parenthood, or the first center for birth, Now, it's interesting, isn't it, that 80% of abortion clinics are now located in minority sections in cities and neighborhoods. And there's a reason for that. Margaret Sanger was a racist and a proponent of eugenics. Now, eugenics is the science of improving the human race by controlling breeding. It's where the Nazis got their idea of the master race, getting rid of all the Jews or anyone who was in, quote, of Aryan descent. And eugenics advocates controls on the procreation of those who are deemed unfit, which includes Jews, blacks, the mentally retarded, Chinese, yes, and even Italians, like me. Now, Margaret Sanger denounced marriage as a degenerate institution, and let me quote her. She says the most meaningful thing a large family could do to a new baby was to kill it. Yes, this was the originator. This was the creator of the Planned Parenthood. Now, She used birth control and sterilization to weed out what she considered as the poor and the unfit. Her teachings and writings were read by the fascists in Italy and the Nazis in Europe, and she was what we would call is a full-fledged racist. Those are the roots of Planned Parenthood. Now, the miracle of life is the evidence of God. And our passage here today makes it very clear that God is the author of life, and that God is personally and intimately involved with conception, development, and birth. He's not the God of the deist, who is more concerned with what we call the transcendent God, that God is so big and so great and so far out there that you could never reach him, never touch him. No, he is an immanent God. He is a God who is near, who is intricately involved with the affairs of life, with human affairs, and involved with not only procreation, but with birth itself. And it seems here the issue is, when does life begin? We'll look at that here in just a second. But 1 out of every 4 pregnancies in America ends in abortion. Over 57 to 60 million have been murdered since 1973. But then they say, well, what about rape and incest and all of that? Well, we know that less than 1% of all abortions, of all the millions that have taken place, are because of rape or incest. Well, life is an unalienable right, as the Declaration of Independence says. I believe the Constitution even protects life. The Fifth Amendment to the Constitution states that life cannot be deprived without due process. So what baby who's simply murdered because a woman or a man, they don't want to deal with that, and it, quote, an accident, all right? They don't want to be bothered with this thing, as they call it. So where's the due process in that? There's no due process. The 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection. All of this is violated by abortion. Again, the question, when does life begin? Let's look at the text. Verse 13, God's wonderful protection. He says here, for you formed my inward parts. Now, in the Hebrew language, it literally means to set upright, to make, or to create. You formed my inward parts. You created me. Genesis 1:27 says this. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God made us. God created us. And according to the scriptures, in those first few verses we read, God knows us intimately. God arranged our genetic structure. God put together our DNA. Now he says here, you formed my inward parts. Now, it's translated, I believe, in the King James Version as you formed my kidneys. Why kidneys? Why is it translated as kidneys, all right? Now, to the Hebrews, the kidneys denoted the innermost recesses of our beings. To the Hebrew, the kidney, and the translation here, denoted the very inner recesses of our beings, more than just the physical part of us. So here, inward parts actually means our mind, our soul, the seat of our desire, the affections of our passion. Man became a living soul. The Bible says that God created man, breathed into man the breath of life, and man became a living soul. This passage here in Psalm 139, verse 13 says, God, you created me, and you formed my inner being. You formed my soul, the seat of my desire, my mind, my emotions, and even my physical body, and I became a living soul. Now skip down. He says, you covered me in my mother's womb. Now, here's another interesting thing in the Hebrew language. The word here means to interweave, or rather you weaved me, you interweaved me, you knit me together, all right? And the original Hebrew carries the idea of protection. He says, you interweave me, you put me in a booth or a hut. Now, I want you to think about this for just a minute. The original Hebrew carries the idea of protection like a booth or a hut. Now, what does that speak about? That speaks about the placenta. God put that little baby in the placenta. Why? Two reasons: to protect that little baby and to nourish him or her. The unborn baby is precious to the Lord. And so here David writes, you covered me in my mother's womb. You put me in that hut. You put me in that booth. You put me in the placenta to protect me and to nourish me. Now let's skip to this verse 14. God's wonderful praise. And I love this because when David saw what God did and realized that God had created him and created his mind, soul, body, and spirit, that God put him in a placenta to protect him and to nourish him, David cries out, I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. That's God's wonderful praise. I will praise you. David says, I will not merely sit back and admire. I will not keep this to myself. I will acknowledge openly, publicly, speak out. I will shout out. I believe it was today. This is January the 19th. It was today, or maybe it's yesterday. We had the anti-abortion, the pro-life people meeting there, or the pro-life march there in Washington, D.C. 500,000 people were there. The media obviously reported just a few thousand. They were publicly, openly speaking out, I will praise you, David says, for I am fearfully. Now, means that which produces a holy fear, a deep reverence. I shudder in sheer astonishment. I am in awe. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And that means to distinguish or to separate. The word wonderfully made means to separate or distinguish. We're not animals. Yep, big news, right? We are not animals. The evolutionist has it wrong. We are different. We are wonderfully made. We are distinct. We are separate from the animals. He says here, and that the more I am acquainted with my creation, the more I shout, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And that brings me to the third major point today, God's wonderful precision. You've got to look at verse 15. Wow, this should make you shout. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. This speaks of God's wonderful precision. My frame. Now, what comes to your mind when you think of frame? Now, I think of bones, and that's exactly what it means here. The word literally means strength, bones, or the skeletal system. Made in secret, hidden from the eyes, in the womb, made in secret. And then he says, I was skillfully wrought. And here's the Hebrew word we have to pull over and park and just kind of get the good gist of it and get the etymology of that word. It is a Hebrew word, rakim. It means embroidered. It means to intricately and precisely make. To make with great care. You know what it means to embroider something, all right? Here it means to deck with colors, to variegate a garment, to weave with threads of varied colors. God says here that we are embroidered. We are decked with colors, that we're variegated. Here's a reference to the various and complicated tissues of the human frame. The tendons, the nerves, the veins, the arteries, the muscles, all woven together. The human body is a beautiful tapestry of color and of art. The human body is amazing. I mean, W.A. Criswell said this many years ago, and I want to read his quote. He said, a man's body may be likened to a vast city. On the inside of that city, there are 10 times 30 trillions of inhabitants. 100,000 is a million. 100 million is a billion. 100 billion is a trillion. 10 times 30 trillion little citizens on the inside of that vast city, all of them with a task assigned. So tiny are those citizens that in one speck of blood, no bigger than the head of a pin, there will be 5 million of them. The 300 trillion are busy all the time doing their part to operate this infinitely intricate machinery. My friend, the mystery of birth. I mean, think with me. At fertilization, a cell development begins. Before the implantation of the sex of the new life is determined, the cell is already developing. At 19 days, the eyes begin to develop. At 24 days, the heart has regular beats. At 4 weeks, the trunk of the new life has 40 pairs of muscles developed, and you see the arms and legs already developing at 4 weeks. By 6 weeks, the skeleton is complete and the reflexes are present. At 43 days, brain activity can be recorded by an EEG device. Fingerprints have formed. At 8 weeks, the stomach and the liver and the kidney and the brain are functioning, and the baby moves from painful stimuli. In the 9th and 10th weeks, he squints, he swallows, hiccups, retracts his tongue. Changes after the 10th week are primarily changes in size. That baby's already fully developed. All the child needs to become a healthy newborn is time and nourishment, and by the way, let me add avoidance of an abortion, doctor. In the 11th and 12th week, he or she responds to touch and sucks the thumb. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. God has intricately created us. The human body is amazing. If you don't believe in God, by looking at the universe or looking at how the world is, you have to believe in God when you study the intricate development of the human body. And that brings me to verse 16, God's wonderful purpose. Let me read it to you again. Your eyes saw my substance being yet unformed, and in your book they were all written, the days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them. The little phrase, unformed substance. The Hebrew word is golem, Golem. If you translate it from the Hebrew and translate it into the English, golem. And it's related to a verb form, galem. And 2 Kings 2:8, Elijah, the same word is used when Elijah folded up his mantle. The same word is used. Now think about this. Galem was when Elijah folded up his mantle to present, to Elisha. Now, golem literally means to roll up, to fold the undeveloped. And this refers to the embryo folded up in the shape of an egg. And he speaks of the embryo here. All the members, watch, are yet undeveloped, but they're folded up. Or rather, we would say undeveloped, but they're folded up. So everything that a human being is there at creation. Everything that a human being is there at fertilization. That embryo in the shape of an egg. Everything that you and I are, our past, our future, our hair color, right? Whether we have hair or not, all of those things, if who we are, if we're a boy or girl, is already folded up. That's the word, Hebrew word for golem. I think of Jeremiah. Jeremiah said this, that God consecrated him as a prophet before he was formed in the womb. Do you realize that Jeremiah was not just conception material, that he was a person, a prophet? Before he was even put in the womb, God had already picked him out and prophesied him. He had a purpose. Could you imagine if Jeremiah was aborted? It would have been the death of a prophet, not the death of a non-person. Jeremiah said that before I was placed in the womb, God put me and created me and made me a prophet. Now, I'm so glad that Mary wasn't a pro-choice. You think about this. Here the Virgin Mary, right? Poor, pregnant teenager, unmarried, she would have been a prime target for the butchers of Planned Parenthood. Don't worry, honey. We don't have to tell your parents. It's just a blob of tissue. We don't want it to ruin your life. Now, I want you to make this call, all right? You remember a long time ago, the NFL Network had a thing called You Make the Call, all right? And they showed you clips of football calls and what the referee to decide this way or that way. So I want you to make the call, all right? All right. Consider the following. The father has syphilis. The mother tuberculosis. They've had 4 children already. The first one was blind. The second one died. The third one was deaf and dumb. And the fourth one had tuberculosis. The mother is now pregnant with her 5th child, but is willing to have an abortion. If you determine she should, she will do it. What would you decide for her? If you choose abortion, congratulations. You've just murdered Beethoven. What about Ethel Waters, the great, famous gospel singer? I mean, she was not only an actress, but she sang with Billy Graham in some of his crusades. She said that she was one woman, she says, who was conceived and born as a result of rape. What a blessing her life has been to the world, to the kingdom. Thank God no one got a hold of her. Yeah, there were terrible circumstances. There was rape, and obviously horrible. But God was able to take her life, that she was conceived in a crime, and yet take that life and use it to help further the kingdom of God. He says here in verse 16, in your book, Lord, they were all written. Now, what's in your book? God has that book, okay? In your book, my nose, my mouth, my eyes, my ears, my hair color, my skin color, my body shape, my height, my individual personality, all of those were in the book of God. Every one of you listening, God had a purpose and a plan. You are not an accident. When God created you, all that you are was in a book, his book, all right? Who you are, your eyes, your personality, again, the hair color, skin color, all of those things, height, all of that was in that book. God knew you completely. Again, we looked at the first part of Psalm 39. He says, where can I go to flee from thy spirit? God, wherever I go, God is always there. God knows me inside and out. You were created by God. Life is a gift from God. He says here, the days fashioned for me. Let me read that verse 16 again. Your eyes saw my substance being yet informed, and in your body they were all written. The days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them. The days fashioned for me. That little phrase, the days fashioned for me, means the days ordained for me. Again, that confirms it. God has a destiny. God has a purpose for you and I. And it's more than the days, than my schedule. I mean, my days have been ordained from God. This is not fatalism, that whatever will be, would be. Within that confines of the day, we have choices. Our choices are either choosing God's way or our way. It doesn't mean that whatever will be, as people say. That's a fatalistic view of life. No. God has a plan for us. God has a purpose for us. God has a destiny for us. And within that time frame, we have the ability to make choices. Some of us choose the wrong way. Some of us choose the right way, all right? Some of us make the wrong choice. Even when we make the wrong choices, God still has a way of forgiving us and getting us back on track. But we have a choice within this frame. We could choose God's way or our way. We could choose God's direction or our direction. We could choose God's purpose or our purpose. You see, life, again, is a gift from God. Mercy killing is wrong. It's a sin. Infanticide is wrong. It's a sin. Suicide is wrong. It's a sin. Abortion is wrong. It's a sin. Your body is made in the image of God. Isn't it interesting that what Satan wants to do is to hurt you And ultimately, Satan wants you to hurt your own body. Ultimately, the Satan and his demons want to drive you in committing suicide, because that thumbs the nose at God, as I said in one of my other videos, that says, God, I'm in control of my life. You're not. I will decide when I die. You won't. My friend, your life is the evidence that God exists. The Bible says here we're fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God. Well, I want you to thank you so much for tuning in here on YouTube. Make sure you like, and then make sure you subscribe. We'd love to have you be part. And then every weekend, you'll be hearing a new video teaching and some other things as well on the Mike Friend Zone Show or the Mike Friend Zone Ministries. All right? All right. God bless.